Your gateway to Korea, Simply K-pop. Hello, I'm your Simply K-pop MC Taewi of AB6. 반갑습니다.
And your special Simply MC for today. Hello, I'm actress Hwang Jia. This week's Simply K-pop.
Gateway to Korea, don't miss out.
Here. It was very important for Korean people during that time to get their freedom back.
The second and final day of early voting for South Korea's presidential election takes place until 6 p.m. on Friday. An all-time high of 19.58% of voters cast their ballots early on Thursday. With 4 days left until the actual voting day, the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung heads to Gangwon-do and Chungcheong-do provinces to woo voters, while the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo hops on a 90-hour non-stop overnight campaign until the end of the campaign period without returning home. A federal appeals court on Thursday reinstated the most sweeping of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, just a day after a trade ruling found his tariffs to be illegal, adding more confusion and uncertainty around his reckless tariffs. Polling stations are open until 6 p.m. today for the second of the 2 days of early voting in the presidential election. We connect right away with our An Sung-jin standing by at one of the polling stations. Hello there, Sung-jin.
Good morning, Tommy.
So, Sung-jin, I am aware you are at the same polling station as you were yesterday. How's the second and final day looking this morning?
Right, Tommy. I'm currently at an early voting location in Yeoksamdong, Gangnam-gu district, an area bustling with offices and business people. I was here since early in the morning, and we saw an influx of voters coming in to vote before they headed to work. Yesterday, we saw the highest voter turnout rate ever for early voting, which first took place in 2014 for national elections. But today, it seems a little bit more calmer compared to the same time yesterday when we got here. However, over time, starting from 8 till 9 a.m., the line has begun much longer, so we'll have to keep an eye on it till this afternoon. As we head into the last day of early voting, have a listen to what some of the voters have to say.
I came to vote early before going to work, regardless of who becomes the next president. I think it's important to vote.
I think voting is the least we can do. I wish that the next government will be fair and transparent and bring more change for those in their 20s and 30s.
So, Sungjin, like you mentioned, we already saw a record high early voting figure on the first day yesterday. How are the figures looking 4 hours into the voting today?
Right, if we take a closer look at the number of people who have already cast their vote starting from 9 a.m., at this polling station I'm at, 1,845 people have voted and a total of 223,978 for Seoul. Other major cities like Busan saw 53,151 people, Daegu 35,508, and Sejong 8,619. However, as we just passed 10 a.m., new figures should be out, which I will be back with later in our news upcast.
And Sungjin, again, today is the last day voters can cast their ballots in the early voting. Walk us through the voting procedure one more time. And how is the National Election Commission ensuring a transparent election?
To begin with, early voting takes place for 2 days, Thursday and Friday, from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. Voters must be over 18 and bring a government-issued ID. I just mentioned the number of voters per hour, which is actually a new measure for the presidential election this time that the NEC announced. The number of voters per hour will be disclosed by each polling station per hour for the first time. The process of verifying vote counting officials will be also strengthened after accusations over the use of Chinese voting officials in 2020. The NEC emphasized that in this election, all 260,000 voting and counting officials are Korean nationals. Ballot boxes will be monitored around the clock, and the NEC will also operate a fair election observation team for the first time to observe the entire election process from voting to counting. That's all I have for now, and I will be back with more updates for our later newscast.
All right, Sungjin, thank you so much for the report this morning. Before early voting ends today, on Friday, we head into the weekend before the election. And we have our political correspondent, Oh Soo-young, in studio with us. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Lovely to be here as always, Tammy.
So, Soo-young, let's start with this highest ever turnout for early voting on day one.
Sure, Tammy. So Thursday's turnout saw a percentage of 19.58, setting an all-time high for a presidential election, as over 8.6 million out of a total 44.3 million eligible voters cast their ballots within a 12-hour time frame. With this unprecedented high for day one, there is now a strong possibility that by the end of Friday, the total early voting figures this year will top the record figure reached in the previous presidential race in 2022, which was 36.93%. Now, by region, Jeollanam-do province, a progressive stronghold, recorded the highest early voting rate at 34.96%, while the conservative stronghold of Daegu recorded the lowest at 13.42%. Now, in the capital region, considered the most fiercely contested battleground and a barometer of public sentiment, Seoul recorded a turnout of 19.13%, which is slightly below the national average, but it's still an increase compared to the 17.31% seen on the first day of the 2022 election. Now, Incheon's early voting rate was 18.40%, and Gyeonggi-do province, which has the largest number of voters nationwide, recorded 18.24%.
Then, Soo-young, any clue as to what this high turnout may indicate about the final result?
Well, historically and globally, Tammy, early voting or alternative forms of voting, such as by post or online, have traditionally been associated with younger voters as well as progressive votes. And here in Korea, it has typically been favoured by voters in their 20s and 30s, as well as the generally left-leaning middle-aged voters in their 40s and 50s, with turnout among them reported to be 5 to 10 percentage points higher than on the actual voting day. As recently as the general election last year, where the Democratic Party won 175 seats, early voting reached 31.28%, the highest for any parliamentary race. But then again, Conservative President Yoon Suk-yeol, of course, he won the 2022 race with a record high early voting rate as well. So, of course, if we look at presidential elections, they do tend to see a higher overall turnout. And voters aged 70 and above, they tend to be conservative. So they might also turn up in swarms on the actual day of voting. In response to this year's early voting, the DP has said that early voting reflects the outrage against the conservative camp, which, of course, is associated associated with impeached President Yoon's martial law. However, the People Power Party says that the turnout simply rose due to increased political interest from both sides and that conservative regions do tend to see stronger turnout on election day. So that's why some analysts say that early voting no longer disproportionately favours one side. So when early voting was still relatively new a couple of years ago, young Koreans did show higher participation, while turnout among older voters was relatively low. But now we expect to see even the elderly participate in large numbers in early voting. So that would make it rather hard to conclude which side now benefits. What we do know, however, is that casting an early vote usually means that the voter they have firmly made up their minds on who to vote for.
Well, Seong, we are currently in this so-called blackout period, meaning polls are banned for 6 days until the election day. Now, that means it's hard to determine public sentiment, but can we potentially see a highest turnout, overall turnout?
Well, Tammy, recent polls released this week before the blackout period show that 8 in 10 voters do intend to participate in this presidential election. And in a voter awareness survey conducted by Gallup Korea earlier this week, 86.8% of respondents say that they would definitely vote in the upcoming election. And that's 3.8 percentage points higher than the 83% reported ahead of the 2022 presidential race. Among those who intend to vote, 37% said that they plan to cast their ballots during the early voting period, and that's up 10 percentage points from the previous election. And the actual voter turnout in the 20th presidential election, the overall turnout, was 77.1%, with early voting making up almost 1 in 4 votes. So we're really going to have to wait and see what the early turnout will be and how it's going to compare to the overall number of votes to draw any kind of meaningful pattern or conclusions.
Definitely. Well, early voting is open until 6 p.m. tonight. I'll see you back here on Monday, next Monday, Suyang.
Sure, Dami. Have a lovely weekend.
You too. And the president's runners are going all out for the next 4 days until the actual big day. The Liberal Party's Lee Jae-myung cast his ballot early on Thursday here in Seoul, is seeking support in the biggest battleground. Our Shin-Young reports.
Marking the first day of early voting in the snap presidential election, Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung kicked off his campaign on Thursday morning after casting his ballot in Sinchon, Seoul, an area known for its many universities. After voting alongside young people, he encouraged the public to vote, emphasizing that it was the strongest way for them to exercise their sovereignty.
We can overcome the insurrection if people come out to vote. I chose to vote alongside young people because I hope this election marks the start of a new era for South Korea, led by its youth.
The DP also focused its efforts on encouraging people to vote. Even though early voting takes place on weekdays, the party believes it's crucial to bring as many supporters as possible to the polls to secure victory in the presidential election. They urged voters to take part and clearly show who truly holds power in the country. Lee later addressed supporters again in the capital, including in Seoul district, one of Seoul's busiest transit hubs.
During his campaign in Seoul's Seoul district, Lee Jae-myung outlined plans to develop the area into a hub for K-culture and make the Gangnam region a more competitive and innovative center of the city's economy.
Ahead of Thursday's rallies, Lee joined a meeting on supporting startups where he discussed expanding the research and development budget and easing regulations.
We're now in a time when the private sector is more advanced than the public sector. So we need to shift the direction of the administration. That includes creating a chief policy coordinator for AI at the presidential office and boosting the National Artificial Intelligence Committee.
Lee will continue his campaign in Gangwon-do province on Friday, where rival Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party is also scheduled to hold rallies. Shin-Young, Arirang News.
The Conservative Party's Kim Moon-soo also voted early at his main rival Lee Jae-myung's congressional district, while calling for stronger voter participation for democracy. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
With the election campaign coming to the final stages as early voting started on Thursday, the People Power Party's presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo focused on making a comeback. His rallies for the day were called the beginning of a great comeback, and he said he's done it before some 30 years ago when he first ran for a seat in the parliament.
I was third until the last 3 days before the election, but won it to become a lawmaker. Who picks parliamentary members? Citizens do. Who picks a president? Citizens do. We call this democracy, right?
The idea of a comeback comes as the election comes from PPP's former president having been impeached and it needing a strong change in narrative. It showed at the rallies. Kim made his way to rallies here in the central part of the capital region in Gyeonggi-do province after kicking off his day in the western port city of Incheon. The route is symbolic, echoing the Incheon landing operation during the Korean War, a turning point that shifted the tide of the war. He also urged people to vote during early voting for his own ballot. He chose to do it at his rival Lee Jae-myung's congressional district. While the party said the message was clear, Kim said he didn't try to force the idea.
Well, it's not just about Lee Jae-myung. My daughter lives in Bucheon, right across the street here. We just stopped by on our way to other rallies. Lee Jae-myung could be one of the reasons.
Kim also told voters that the early voting process will be managed fairly, though some question the process as the transportation and opening of the ballot is more complicated than regular voting. He said not voting is a bigger problem. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Also on Thursday, Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok cast his ballot at an early voting station in Hwasong, Gyeonggi-do province, which he added was the closest to where he lives. On his campaign agenda for Thursday were talks with tech workers, college students, and a visit to a popular street food alley in Central Seoul. Also, pundits believe a merger between Lee Jun-seok and People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo is now essentially out of the equation as early voting has kicked off. A U.S. appeals court has temporarily allowed U.S. President Donald Trump's import tariffs to remain in effect after a lower court ruled Wednesday they were illegal. Our Kim Jung-sil has more.
A U.S. appeals court has allowed President Trump's trade tariffs to stay in place for now by putting a temporary hold on a lower court's decision to block them. This puts on hold Wednesday's ruling by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which said Trump had gone beyond his legal powers in imposing sweeping tariffs on imports under an emergency powers law. The law known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, says the president may use its powers only to address unusual and extraordinary national security threats. The court said IEEPA does not give the president full control over trade policy. But on Thursday, the appeals court said that decision would not be enforced while judges review the case. It gave the plaintiffs until June 5th to file their response. Also on Thursday, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. issued a separate ruling finding parts of Trump's tariff policy unlawful. The judge wrote that the IEEPA does not enable the president to unilaterally impose, revoke, pause, reinstate, and adjust tariffs to reorder the global economy. Earlier that day, the White House defended the tariffs, saying they're necessary to protect American industries.
How are you? Wow. President Trump is in the process of rebalancing America's trading agreements with the entire world, bringing tens of billions of dollars in tariff revenues to our country, and finally ending the United States of America from being ripped off.
With legal challenges mounting, the future of the tariffs remains uncertain. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
And economists and diplomatic experts have gathered on South Korea's southern Jeju island for an international peace forum, where growing uncertainty of Trump's trade policies were at the center of discussion. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae Eun-ji, was there.
Experts are now warning that U.S. President Donald Trump's economic policies could have conflicting consequences that do not necessarily promote economic growth or increase productivity in the country's economy. Speaking on Thursday at an international peace forum held on Jeju Island, Jeffrey Schott, a senior fellow from Peterson Institute for International Economics, said uncertainty about the size and duration of tariffs will discourage or delay investment decisions.
And so the climate is even more uncertain, and uncertainty is a tax on doing business. That's a lesson in economics that I think the Trump administration is only now beginning to learn.
South Korea, which faces 25% U.S. reciprocal tariffs, has been seeking a trade deal with the Trump administration before the July 8th deadline, when the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted. Scott Snyder, the head of the Korea Economic Institute of America, who's also at the Jeju Forum, explained there will be a series of deals, adding that although the current focus is on tariffs, there will be another negotiation on security.
I would say deal by deal. Deal by deal. And I think that is going to go on maybe for the entire Trump administration. New things will pop up. They will require negotiation. And so I think that's what will happen, and I think it will be ongoing. It will be stressful. But I think that until both sides come to a place where they're satisfied with everything, President Trump's style is to want to make deals. But I don't believe that it's going to be one big, beautiful deal.
He suggested it would be important for the Korean government to have negotiation strategies to make sure that what Trump is trying to do is perceived as too costly. He also noted that shipbuilding is clearly an area where South Korea has a set of technologies that the U.S. is in need of. Amid more uncertainty over Trump's tariff policies, especially following the latest decision from the U.S. Trade Court, eyes are now on how the trade negotiations between Seoul and Washington will play out. 배은지, Arirang News, Jeju.
The Trump administration has begun the process of barring Harvard University from enrolling international students, but the courts have again blocked it. The U.S. State Department said that the review of student visas will resume soon. Lee Seung-ja has the details.
Last week, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration's decision to revoke Harvard University's ability to enroll international students. This put the brakes on the government's plan to take away Harvard's certification in the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, which allows schools in the U.S. to host international students with proper visas. However, the government notified the Ivy League school once again on Wednesday that it would revoke the program despite the court injunction. The Trump administration on Thursday gave Harvard 30 days to contest the government's move to revoke its Student and Exchange Visitor Program. In a notice of intent sent by the U.S. Department of Homeland on Wednesday, it said that the school has 30 calendar days to submit written representation under oath and supported by documentary evidence, setting forth why SCVP should not be withdrawn from Harvard's certification. However, this too was blocked by a federal judge who said that she would issue a preliminary injunction that would allow the school to continue enrolling international students. In the meantime, the U.S. State Department hinted at the resumption of student visa interviews, which were suspended earlier this week in order to introduce a new social media screening system. The Trump administration has been arguing that Harvard has failed to maintain a campus environment free from violence and anti-Semitism, arguing that the school should be stripped of their ability to enroll international students. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Israel has approved a new U.S.-backed ceasefire proposal developed by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. It has also reportedly been presented to Hamas and is currently under review. On Thursday, May 29th, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced that Israel had signed off on a 60-day ceasefire proposal before it was submitted to Hamas. The proposal includes the release of 10 living and 18 deceased Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian detainees, along with terms for increased humanitarian aid to Gaza. However, Hamas has responded with reservations, stating that it does not meet key demands, such as a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Hamas official Bassem Naim said the proposal does not respond to any of our people's demands, foremost among which is stopping the war and famine. Canada's state of Manitoba is facing severe wildfires, prompting the declaration of a province-wide state of emergency. Over 17,000 residents have been evacuated. On Thursday local time, Manitoba Premier Wap Kinew announced a state of emergency due to wildfires that have already burned approximately 491,000 acres. The city of Flin Flon, home to 5,000 people, was under a mandatory evacuation order. The Canadian Armed Forces have been deployed to assist in the evacuation, airlifting residents from remote communities. There are concerns about whether the fires can be contained, with the situation made worse by abnormally dry conditions and a lack of significant rainfall in the forecast. Premier Kinew said this is the largest evacuation Manitoba will have seen in most people's living memory. Meanwhile, smoke from the blazes is affecting air quality in some U.S. cities such as Chicago and Detroit. In Brazil, hyper-realistic reborn baby dolls designed and handcrafted to resemble real infants are growing in popularity, stirring both fascination and controversy. Videos featuring emotional interactions with these dolls have gone viral, with influencers staging scenarios such as simulated births and public outings. While a bill has been passed honoring reborn doll artisans, a lawmaker proposed banning public healthcare services for the dolls following a video of a woman taking one to a hospital. Critics argue that the attention given to the reborn doll community distracts from more pressing societal issues. Proponents defend the practice, citing therapeutic benefits. Finally, in the United States, Washington, D.C. is preparing for its World Pride 2025 event, slated for Saturday, May 31st. Before raising the Pride flag to usher in the biennial event, the D.C. mayor said the flag tells a story of pride, perseverance, and progress. This marks the 50th anniversary of Pride in the U.S. Capitol, and the city expects up to 3 million attendees for the celebration. A welcome concert by Shakira will be held at Nationals Park to kick off the event, which will run until the end of June.
Brace for a weekend heat wave. Starting today, Seoul's daytime high will climb to 29 degrees Celsius, and we will see temperatures close to 30 degrees through the entire weekend. But as you can see, if you're dressing for the afternoon, it might feel too breezy in the mornings and evenings, so be sure to keep a light jacket handy. Most parts of Korea will be under strong sunshine, but passing rain is expected in the southern coastal regions, with 5 to 10 millimeters in the forecast during the day. And Seoul will be nearing 30 degrees this afternoon. Daejeon, Gwangju will make it to 27 degrees, but at least humidity is not too high just yet, so it should still feel pleasant in the shade. Again, a hot and sunny weekend ahead to welcome June. Then early next week, rain is expected in the southern coast and Jeju Island, which should bring a welcome break from the heat.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.
천안에 가면 to always play it safe, so I don't get out often. I love rainy 글로벌 K컬처 세계 속에 꽃 피우다. 2025 천안 K컬처 박람회.
저희 누나가 발레를 하다 보니까 자연스럽게 누나 발레 학원에 따라가서 누나가 하는 모습을 보니까 저도 하고 싶다고 생각이 조금 들어서 발레 음악에 맞춰서 아무 춤이나 추다 보니까 그냥 그 음악에 맞춰서 제가 몸을 움직이는 게 재밌다고 느껴졌었는지 발레를 계속 하고 있더라고요. 나이가 좀 어릴 때 제가 가진 장점이 무엇인지도 모르고 아예 제가 가진 단점도 모를 때 발레를 시작했다 보니까 제일 큰 문제가 이제 평발이었던 것 같아요. 평발이다 보니까 발레를 할 때 쥐가 조금 많이 나는 편이라 그거를 견뎌가면서 춤을 계속 춰야 했던 거 그게 가장 극복하기 힘들었던 것 같고요. 제가 다리가 다른 친구들보다 조금 두껍다고 해서 제 다리를 조금 싫어했었는데 근데 이제 로잔에 갔다 오고 나서 오히려 제 다리에서 나오는 파워풀한 힘이 좋았다고 해주시는 분들도 있다는 걸 느껴가지고 그 두 개가 가장 극복하기도 힘들었고 기억에 남는 것 같아요. 프릭스티 로잔이라는 콩쿨 자체가 학생들 사이에서는 가장 크고 의미 있는 콩쿨이다 보니 제가 그 로잔 영상을 보면서 자라왔기 때문에 그 무대에 서서 제가 춤을 췄다는 것 자체가 엄청 인상 깊었던 것 같아요. 제가 걸어왔던 길, 이게 맞는 방법일까? 근데 그런 의구심을 다 없앨 수 있게 제가 가는 길이 맞았다라는 거를 확인시켜줬던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 감정이 들어서 조금 감격스러웠던 것 같아요. 한 배역에만 잘 할 수 있는 명수가 아니라 어떠한 배역을 받아도 다 넣어서 소화해낼 수 있는 그런 스펙트럼이 넓은 명수가 되고 싶습니다.
Held its first debate over the weekend. The
economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the status UN summit. A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bring news just for you. It's Friday, May 30th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and you're watching News Generation. Joining us this Friday is Brooke Prince.
Hello, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, and Lee Won-bin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. So Friday is when we explore topics that resonate with young people around the world. Now, tomorrow marks World No Tobacco Day. That is May 31st, and established by member states of the World Health Organization in 1987. This day aims to raise awareness about the dangers of smoking and what we can do to prevent the diseases and deaths it causes. So today on News Gen, we're going to take a closer look at how our society views smoking and also quitting smoking. So we're going to begin our show with the situation in Korea. So I want to ask you, Won-bin, how do you think public perception of smoking has changed here over the decades?
I can confidently say that the perception of smoking has changed a lot. Like back in the 90s, smoking was considered as a rite of passage of being an adult. You were basically allowed and you were expected to smoke anywhere, like in buses or in offices and even on airplanes, and no one really had a second thought about it. They're like, oh, they're smoking inside a bus. I guess.
Yeah, many thought it was just natural.
Exactly. And to give an illustration, my parents told me that back in the 90s, it was very common for restaurants to have an ashtray for each tables because people like to enjoy smoking as they were eating food or having a glass of alcohol. And smoking scenes were very common on TVs and in movies as well. But as the health risk did become widely known, attitudes definitely did start shifting.
Right.
The government stepped in with stronger regulations, such as warning labels on cigarette packs, tax hikes making the prices of cigarettes higher from 2,500 won to 4,500 won, which is about $2 to $3.50, and expanding no smoking zones as well. So these days, smoking in public spaces, especially indoors and public facilities like schools or subway stations, is heavily restricted. And I think it's safe to say that Korea has become much more aware of the dangers and the harms of smoking in general.
And if I may add, I think that in the past, especially during our parents' generation, it was easier to find places that smoking was available. But nowadays, I think that it is harder to find places where smoking is available, and there are more smoking zones in public facilities that Won-bin just mentioned. So definitely some change in terms of the smoking culture, should we say, here in Korea. Then I want to ask you, Brooke, is this a similar situation in the United States? What would you say?
Well, while the World Health Organization has helped widely spread awareness of the health risks of smoking, each country kind of takes its own approach to the issue. So in the U.S., where I'm from, public perception of smoking has definitely changed dramatically over the years. Smoking, just like in Korea, was once seen as normal or even kind of glamorized decades ago. You used to see it a lot in TV ads and movies, but then there was mounting evidence of its dangers that eventually shifted that view. And these days, smoking in America is largely stigmatized, and the adult smoking rate has dropped from over 40% in the 1960s to just 11% in recent times. And this was achieved through public smoking bans, high tobacco taxes, FDA regulation, and strong health campaigns like the CDC's Tips from Former Smokers, which featured real people affected by smoking. And we see a lot of graphic images on cigarette packs, right? But it's one thing to see that and another to actually hear from a real human being what they've gone through as a result of smoking.
Right.
I think we are seeing Korea start to follow this trajectory, but the progress has been quite slow. Just anecdotally, I would say I come across smoking every single day in Korea when I'm walking down the street multiple times a day. I do have asthma, so being around secondhand smoke is quite difficult for me. Whereas when I go to America, I visit a few times a year and I go to several different states. I honestly can't remember the last time that I saw a smoker out and about in the U.S. Of course, it still does happen, but I think that progress has been made in America on that front that I hope that Korea can also replicate.
Yeah, I hope we could see more rapid processes, progress in terms of saying no to smoking.
I agree.
So as Won-bin and Brooke mentioned, as awareness of the harmful effects of smoking grows and more people recognize the need to really quit, Korea is currently seeing some legal action against tobacco companies, which I found personally interesting. So Won-bin, could you walk us through the details of this specific case?
Absolutely, I can. So the Korea's National Health Insurance Service, in Korean 건강보험공단, has been in a legal battle against domestic tobacco companies since 2014. The lawsuit seeks to recover about 53.3 billion won, or about $35 million. That's the cost of medical treatment for roughly 3,000 patients with lung or laryngeal cancer. And the case focuses on smokers who have smoked more than a pack a day for 20 years or more, or who smoked for over 30 years. And now in its 12th year, there's a growing pressure on the courts to finally deliver a verdict for the sake of the health of the country.
Right, I'm very curious what kind of decision the court will make. But in the meantime, Brooke, what's the general public opinion been on regarding this lawsuit?
Well, we do have some figures for you on that front. A survey actually showed that 6 out of 10 adults in Korea believe that tobacco companies should pay for medical expenses related to smoking, as you're seeing on the screen here. Smokers are more likely to think this than non-smokers, with 73% of smokers saying that they believe that tobacco companies should bear this cost, and 60% of non-smokers saying the same thing. Now, actually, this legal battle that we're talking about mirrors the situation in the U.S. when tobacco companies agreed in the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement to pay $206 billion to states for healthcare costs linked to smoking-related disease. And this was a huge landmark moment in holding the tobacco industry accountable. And they also funded prevention programs. They started enacting advertising bans. And I think that really got the ball rolling in America. And likewise, many Koreans seem to support a ruling in this ongoing court case many years, over a decade for this court case. A lot of Koreans really want this to be wrapped up and to decide that tobacco companies should be the one bearing these costs for the public health reasons.
Right, so we just saw the public opinion over who should shoulder the healthcare costs of smokers. So I want to ask our panelists, where do you stand on this issue? Do you think the individuals should pay, or do you think the tobacco companies should bear the cost?
Well, it's a tricky question, and I think it would depend on the people. But me personally, I think the companies are mainly responsible for the damage that has been caused, because it's very clear that tobaccos and cigarettes have a direct and a deadly link to these diseases. And when healthcare costs too much because of smoking, I think the companies that profited from it are partially responsible for it. It's not just about money, and I think it's more about taking responsibility socially for the harm that they've caused. And one realistic approach or suggestion that I have is that I think they should at least partially pay for the bills or put on campaigns or more programs that can help people to quit smoking, or at least reduce it if they are already smoking.
So Wonbin says the tobacco companies should at least partially bear the medical costs of these smokers. Then what do you think, Brooke?
Well, you know, this reminds me of the debate about fast food, right? Everyone knows that fast food is unhealthy. We all have access to that information. We know how many calories there are and what other nutrition is in there. But obviously, people still eat fast food, and negative health outcomes can result from that. So the question becomes, who's responsible, the fast food companies or the consumers? It's the same question that we're asking about smoking. And I do agree that tobacco companies are responsible for creating a harmful product. Not only is it harmful, but it's inherently addictive.
Right.
And so I do think it's unfair to place all of the blame on smokers because of these addictive properties. It makes them, it's hard for them to quit, even if they really, really want to. So I would agree that companies should bear some responsibility. I think the answer is somewhere in between. It's not black and white that one person should have to pay for it. But it is a personal choice at the end of the day.
Right.
There is some culpability in choosing to put this unhealthy product in your body. So I think that the consumers themselves should also have to, you know, pay the consequences of those actions as well. So somewhere in between, I would say.
Wow, you guys presented some very strong arguments.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to take a look at what our viewers think on this matter. We ran a poll on our Arirang News YouTube channel asking, should tobacco companies cover the treatment costs for smoking-related cancers? If we looked at the results, 57%, a little more than a half, answered no, while 43% answered yes. Well, thank you to our voters for voting. Now, to hear more opinions on this issue, we'll connect with a Canadian Gen Z after the break. Don't go anywhere.
Incheon wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search our channel Arirang News. Click Community and leave a comment down below. Make a new type of news with us.
And joining us today is Canadian Gen Z Tate Yap. Welcome to the show, Tate.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So Tate, we want to ask you, in Canada, are tobacco companies held accountable for the health of smokers? For example, similar to like the lawsuit filed in Korea by the National Health Insurance Service that we just mentioned and discussed earlier.
So the tobacco companies haven't been totally held accountable for the health of smokers when it comes to them selling their products properly with pictures and warning labels that are required. However, there have been some lawsuits filed regarding improper warnings and misleading labels, such as companies promoting a light product, trying to make it appear as more healthy, and just companies not properly warning consumers about the risks of smoking in general. That being said, there are some annual charges that these tobacco manufacturers have to pay to recover the costs of tobacco-related activities that are undertaken by the government of Canada. And I do believe that Canada is looking to take more action to relieve taxpayers some of this cost and put them onto the companies instead. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that.
Hello, Mr. Yap. I love your last name, so I had to use it. My question for you is, what's the smoking rate in Canada, and how do people generally view smoking there?
So the smoking rate in Canada, it's pretty similar to what you said about the United States. It's currently sitting around 12%, which is about 4 million people now. It's a big shift from where it was in around 2010, which was 21% and 6 million people back then. I would say this is a great statistic, and a portion of it is due to the health consequences that we're being made more aware of. However, I believe a lot of the reason for it is due to the rise of vaping and e-cigarette products. They're just far more convenient. People aren't having to leave the buildings to go for smoke breaks at work as frequently. Vaping doesn't leave a bad smell on your clothing or your hair like smoking does, and they're just tastier. Unfortunately, opens the market to younger adults and sometimes even young teens. So to reiterate on that portion, smoking rate has decreased, but I believe the amount of people who are vaping now, it's kind of offset that statistic. In terms of how we view it, it's always been viewed as a dirty habit, especially in my lifetime. But now that vaping is a thing and there's less smell, doesn't emit as much smoke, I think it's viewed even worse now. And it's much less of a social activity as it used to be.
Now, I completely agree with you about the e-cigarettes part, Tate. So in your opinion, what policies or actions are truly effective in reducing smoking rates?
I think the current charges that these companies are facing and the additional charges that they may have to face could rise the price of cigarettes. And with the economy the way it is, I think that's going to deter a lot of users from smoking as frequently, at least, if not at all. That and enhancing the restrictions on smoking areas. For example, back in the day, you might be able to find restaurants where there's a smoking section. If you could find one today, that would be very, very rare. And just public settings as well. Like there's more restrictions on where you're allowed to smoke, how far you had to be away from the buildings. Those two things, and just cracking down on the effectiveness of the warnings that we're putting, making sure everyone is aware of what they're putting in their body and the risks that it has. I hope they continue to do that, and I also hope that these vaping manufacturers will have to abide to similar regulations in the future as well, because it's also very harmful.
All right, Tate, thank you so much for joining our show today, and hope you have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You guys as well.
Thank you. Right, so back here in Korea, both the government and the public are making efforts to help people quit smoking. So we're now going to focus on these measures. So Wonbin, can you give us a few examples?
Right, so as you just said, both the government and the society are actively working to reduce smoking. For example, smoking is banned within 30 meters or 100 feet of facilities with minors, like schools, daycare centers, and kindergartens. And there are also prevention programs for kids, along with anti-smoking ads on TV and online. And I personally remember watching a no smoking speech from designated educators in elementary and middle schools explaining how unhealthy and harmful smoking is. And more recently, the Ministry of Health even launched a campaign focused on quitting e-cigarettes, emphasizing that although they are a better alternative compared to cigarettes, they are still unhealthy, like Tate told us. And on the social side, there are designated no smoking apartments that encourages residents to quit smoking, and some cities even offer cash incentives to people who successfully quit smoking. So overall, there definitely is, and we can see a growing push from both policy and the community to help people quit smoking once and for all.
And what could be some other examples, Brooke?
Well, in addition to the efforts mentioned by Wonbin, Korea has introduced graphic health warnings on cigarette packs. They've raised tobacco taxes to discourage purchases and expanded smoke-free zones to more public areas just beyond the 30-meter rule as well. The government also supports nationwide smoking cessation clinics that offer free counseling and nicotine replacement therapies. Strict regulations limit tobacco advertising, especially toward the youth, and ongoing public awareness campaigns, including those warning about e-cigarettes, reinforce the health risks of smoking. So I think all of these combined measures that we've been talking about really show that Korea is committed to helping people quit smoking, and as a result, we've seen a shift in societal attitudes. Younger generations, like the MZ generation, now tend to view smoking a little bit more negatively compared to older generations, which I think is an encouraging indicator that Korea is hopefully driving towards a healthier future.
Right, so a lot of efforts, a lot of things are being done, but I think that the big question is how effective these efforts have been. So I want to ask you, Wonbin, first. Do you think that more work should be done? What's your thought on this?
So if we look at the big picture and the big trends, the short answer is yes. It definitely did help to reduce the smoking rate. We're seeing dramatic changes compared to the 90s. And especially, I think this is something to point out, when it comes to limiting smoking in indoor spaces, we've done a really good job. We changed a lot because smoking indoors can harm a lot of non-smokers as well. Yes, not only the smokers themselves. However, if we dig into the specifics, there are still worries as the smoking rate did make a rebound in 2023 from 17% to 19% after 7 years of consecutive decrease. And it seems like e-cigarettes is one of the biggest factors that is playing to this, because paradoxically, the fact that it is healthier or less harmful makes it easier for people to start or give it a try. And I think Brooke would have more to explain about this.
Okay, then I want to ask the same question to Brooke.
Yeah, I think there's been some positive movement, but there is definitely more to be done, especially with the rise of what we've been talking about, vaping, e-cigarettes. In the U.S., vaping is particularly popular among young adults. In fact, over 15% of people aged 21 to 24 use e-cigarettes. And it's because people believe that they are a safer alternative to traditional smoking.
A healthier alternative?
Exactly. But it's kind of like earlier we talked about fast food. It's like, I'm not going to eat burgers, I'm going to get their salad. But if the salad is drenched in ranch, it's kind of the same thing as having a burger, right?
What an analogy.
So research shows that vaping is still a serious health risk. It can cause lung and heart problems, and this misconception that it's harmless actually makes it more dangerous because more people are going to try it. Back in the day, they also used to say that cigarettes were physician approved.
Oh, right.
And we've definitely found out that cigarettes are very dangerous. I think the same thing is happening with vaping. Korea has many similar concerns. While we have seen cigarette smoking decline over the years, e-cigarette use has grown, especially among the MZ group, because a lot of the products are very pretty. If you go to the stores, they're very aesthetically pleasing.
And they smell okay
better
when compared to tobacco.
Exactly. They're marketed as healthier. So all of this is misleading consumers. And what we need to focus on, both in the U.S. and Korea, is to address these emerging tobacco trends, educate the youth, and enact stronger regulations.
And hopefully we could see Korea's smoking rate go down after rebound.
Absolutely.
All right, and that's all we have for today and this week's News Generation, but we will be back next Monday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. Special thanks to Brooke Prince.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and Wonbin.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, and to our viewers, thank you for watching, and hope you have a lovely weekend. We are News Generation.
How to survive in Korea. Weddings. Step 0.